What are some great gift ideas for a child with an inquisitive mind, a curious spirit, and a playful nature? A year-long Family Max membership to Great Lakes Science Center and a Camp Curiosity session for winter or summer break. The whole family will enjoy unlimited visits to the Science Center with hundreds of hands-on exhibits, including the NASA Glenn Visitor Center, and member discounts to incredible programs like Camp Curiosity. See all the info at greatscience.com. That's greatscience.com.
LifeAudio.
Good morning, friends and faithful listeners, and welcome to the Bible Explained podcast on this lovely Christmas week. We're going to be finishing up part 2 of 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 16. We talked about part 1 on Thursday, and so I highly recommend actually going back to Thursday's episode and listening to part 1 if you haven't yet. But basically, this is the rules for widows receiving financial compensation from the church itself. We'll finish up this topic today. Well, faithful listeners, I don't know if you can tell, but I got a cold. It's not the worst cold I've ever had. I've had actually like really, really bad colds where I'm just like miserable for a whole week. No, this isn't that bad. It started on Friday, I think it was, like Friday evening, and I was able to get through Monday's episode because I could still breathe. By that point, like I had a sore throat, but I could still breathe. Now I'm at the point where like I'm just fully clogged up, you know what I mean? And I can't breathe out of my nose really well, so my voice sounds really weird. I hate colds, but not sick enough that I can take time off of work. And also I don't want to take time off of work. I like you guys. I like talking about the Bible. And we're going to talk about 1 Timothy 5 today, right after this quick word from one of our sponsors.
This isn't just a game, it's a once-in-a-generation event. The Harlem Globetrotters 100-year tour. Celebrate 100 years of high-flying dunks, 100 years of show-stopping moves, and 100 years of changing the game. Bring the whole family and be part of the legacy. This game is once in a century. Be there at Rocket Arena on December 28th. Go to harlemglobetrotters.com for your tickets to the 100-year tour.
The Cleveland Orchestra invites you to Severance Music Center for thrilling music and extraordinary experiences you won't want to miss. Verdi's Requiem, January 15th through the 18th at Severance Music Center. Tickets at clevelandorchestra.com.
And now let's get into 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 16. We talked about the first portion on Thursday, and now we're going to finish up the rest today. I'll be reading as always from the WEB version, but go ahead and grab your favorite version of the Bible, whatever that may be, and also your cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a cup of water, which is what I'm drinking right now. I'm drinking lots of water, trying to stay hydrated, so I can hopefully sing that song for you guys tomorrow night for the Christmas Eve special. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sing it. I'm not going to lie. It might sound a little bit weird, but we're going to try to get through it. All right, faithful listeners, let's read 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 16. Don't rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, the younger men as brothers, the elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters, in all purity. Honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them learn first to show piety toward their own family, and to repay their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. Now she who is a widow indeed and desolate has her hope set on God, and continues in petitions and prayers night and day. But she who gives herself to pleasure is dead while she lives. Also command these things, that they may be without reproach. But if anyone doesn't provide for his own, and especially his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let no one be enrolled as a widow under 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, being approved by good works, if she has brought up the children, if she has been hospitable to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, and if she has diligently followed every good work. But refuse younger widows, for when they have grown wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have rejected their first pledge. Besides, they also learn to be idle, going about from house to house, not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. I desire therefore that the younger widows marry, bear children, rule the household, and give no occasion to the adversary for insulting. For already some have turned away after Satan. If any man or woman who believes has widows, let them relieve them, and don't let the assembly be burdened, that it might relieve those who are widows indeed. So last week we did part 1 of financial giving to widows, and we discussed some pretty controversial things. We talked about how, children are the ones who should first support their Christian parents, their elderly parents. It's actually something God wants these Christian children to do. And remember, when Paul is talking to Timothy, he's talking specifically to a pastor and how he is supposed to run the church. So when we look at things like this, it's important to remember that Paul is not talking about unbelieving households. He's talking specifically to the church. Those children going to that church should be supporting their parents financially at the end of their lives when those elderly parents can't support themselves any longer. And, this was especially true in Paul's day and age when government assistance did not exist. There was nothing in the Roman government that helped widows or elderly people. That came back down to the individual families would have to help each other. So Paul's like, these believing children who attend your church, Timothy, if they refuse to provide for their elderly parents, then they are actually worse than an unbeliever. And why? Because unbelievers even know that the elderly need to be taken care of. Even a person who does not go to church probably agrees, yes, we need to take care of elderly people and not let them starve to death or let them be homeless or let them die of disease or something like that. Most people agree we take care of the elderly. So if a Christian person can't agree on that, and they're like, no, my mom hurt me too bad and I refuse to help her in her old age, in her widowhood, Paul is like, that person is worse than an unbeliever because he is not taking care of his own family members, even when unbelievers know that that is something important to do. And then we also talked about how whenever we see giving in the New Testament, almost always, not across the board, but more often than not, when we see giving being commanded specifically in the New Testament, it's almost always commanded that Christians give to other Christians. And one of the points I made on Thursday's episode was that the church is not commanded to give financially to every single person on the planet. It's not commanded to financially support every single person. And a lot of times, that's what people think the church is supposed to do. The church is just supposed to give and give and give and not have any finances for itself. But as we're going to see from this passage today that we finish up on, that is not a biblical idea. Yes, the church is supposed to give, but it's supposed to be very careful with what and who they give their finances toward. But also the church is not to create a burden for itself by giving so much that it doesn't have any finances to properly run. So let's talk about that, starting in verse 9. Let no one be enrolled as a widow under 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, being approved by good works, if she has brought up children, if she has been hospitable to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, and if she has diligently followed every good work. So this right here is talking specifically about the church financially supporting a widow for the rest of her life, like literally giving this widow a paycheck until the day she dies. There are stipulations for that. First and foremost, as we talked about on Thursday, the children first have the responsibility to take care of their parents before the church has that responsibility. But let's say this widow doesn't have any children. Then she is a candidate for being financially supported by the church. But she can't be under 60 years old, is what Paul says. So she has to be retirement age. She can't be too young, because if she's too young, she wouldn't need financial support from the church in the first place because she's healthy enough to actually go and get a job for herself or provide for herself, or even to get remarried and have her husband provide for her then. So that's Paul's idea. This woman has to be above the age of 60 years old, somebody who no longer is able to work for themselves, mainly because the things that they were able to do are just getting harder and harder for them. So that's why Paul says they have to be 60 years old or above. And also they have to have conducted themselves properly in the church also. They have to have been the wife of one man. So this is not talking about a woman who was previously a widow who ended up getting remarried and is now a widow again. That's not what Paul's talking about here. He would be talking about divorce in this situation. And most likely a divorce where this woman willfully divorced her husband and was remarried. Or a woman who cheated on her husband and was divorced because of that. Willful divorce or willful infidelity within the marriage. That's what I believe he is discussing. So it says she has to have been the wife of one man, being approved by good works if she has brought up children. So as we know, if a widow had her own child and that child was an adult, that child actually should be the one supporting the mother, as we already discussed. But in that case, that would disqualify the widow from being financially supported by the church. So what Paul is likely talking about here is this woman raising children who those children have died, and she is all alone. Or raising somebody else's children like an adopted child, and that child was still very young. Or possibly being a mentor to other people's children as well. The disciple teacher thing was very popular, not just for boys, but also for girls as well. So girls would find mentors to teach them all sorts of different things as well. And it could be that Paul is talking about this widow being a good mentor to these children that she has brought up. So yes, it could be talking about her own children, somebody else's children, or even little disciples. We don't know, but regardless, this woman would have to be someone who did not lead little children astray, but actually brought them closer to Christ, is what Paul's talking about. If she has been hospitable to strangers, so inviting people in, cooking food, not minding having people in her house, or maybe just bringing food to share at potlucks or whatever people would do back in Paul's day. There was a potluck, actually. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was called communion. So when people would gather for communion, they would actually bring food to eat at the communion. So maybe this woman consistently brought food to these communions and was just hospitable in that way. So she has to be hospitable. She has to be a good mentor or a good mother. She also has to have been not divorced due to infidelity or just due to willful dislike of her husband. And on top of this, she also has to have washed the saints' feet and relieved the afflicted. Now, that could be literally talking about getting down on her hands and knees and actually washing feet. As we know, that was a humble position to take and a very dirty position to take because, back in these days, people primarily got around on foot and they wore sandals for the most part. So washing somebody's feet, you'd be washing all the dust and grime and crap and whatever else was stuck between your toes. And people would do this to show honor to the guests that they were receiving. It was a very humble position to take. And that's why we see Jesus doing this very thing to his disciples. He washed the disciples' feet. And that's also why Peter was offended by it. When he saw Jesus coming to him, he's like, Jesus, you're not going to wash my feet. Don't wash my feet. Because it was such an embarrassing position to take. And yet it was a humble position because you're showing care for the person you are receiving. So this very well could be Paul talking about this woman actually washing the saints' feet. But it also could be just an analogy of this woman serving other people, humbling herself and thinking of other people and what they would need. And also relieving the afflicted. So that would be talking about giving to them, comforting them in some way, visiting them if they're sick, making them soup if they're sick, bringing them food. I don't know, anybody who is afflicted with something, whether it is an ailment or a trial or even financial distress, this woman gave of herself to actually help these people. So these would be the qualified candidates to live off of the church for the rest of their lives. They have to have nobody else able to take care of them. They have to have lived a life of servitude and kindness towards other people. And now her reward for doing all of that hard work before is that the church is now going to serve her until the day that she dies. So it all kind of comes back around. But in the case of younger widows, is what it says right here in verse 11, refuse them. For when they have grown wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation, because they have rejected their first pledge. So you may initially read that and be like, oh, it's a sin for widows to get remarried. Well, absolutely not, because if you actually keep reading through this, Paul does say these widows should get married. It's good for them to get married. What Paul is saying here is that these young widows have recently lost a husband. They are grieving. They are sad, they are discouraged, and because of that, some of them end up making very poor decisions when it comes to relationships because they're feeling really lonely. But in that case, if this younger widow does end up going and getting remarried, maybe rashly, and she's being supported by the church, perhaps her new husband, who sees that this young woman is being handed a paycheck consistently every single week or month or whatever it is, he might try to benefit off of that as well. And so Paul is actually protecting church finances by saying no to the younger widows, because most likely the majority of them will go and get remarried. So that's why Paul says, refuse the younger widows. Not because he doesn't have a heart for them, or because he doesn't feel sorry for them. Obviously he does, because this entire chapter is talking about how we're supposed to treat widows with honor and respect. But if a young woman becomes a widow and starts financially benefiting from the church, she may get remarried and her new husband take advantage of the church, and also she herself will start to take advantage of the church as well. Paul says she will learn to be idle, going about from house to house. So this young woman suddenly no longer has a husband, so she's lonely. And she also is now getting financial support from the church, so much so that she doesn't even have to work anymore. So she suddenly has all this time on her hands and she is lonely. So she starts bothering other people, is what Paul says. She goes about from house to house, not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not to say. Women can be real mean to each other. And if you've ever worked in a salon, you will know that to be the case. I don't know what it is, but women are much more verbal. And so if this young lady has nothing better to do because she doesn't have a husband to talk to anymore, she doesn't have to go out and get a job, she'll end up becoming a busybody more likely than not, and start gossiping and saying things that she should not say to other church members. And so that's why Paul says refuse the younger widows. Now, that doesn't mean that these younger widows can't get support from the church in other ways. Absolutely not. Paul is talking about a lifelong paycheck here that widows could receive if they were qualified. So obviously, all of these widows were getting support from the church in other ways, maybe by helping them find jobs, maybe by introducing them to people, maybe by providing care for their children, or even financial assistance here and there if that was what was needed. So don't think here that Paul is saying, oh, younger widows don't deserve any kind of compensation whatsoever. No, he is not talking about that. Context is very important when reading scripture. So instead of receiving this lifelong paycheck, Paul desires that these widows, the younger widows, marry, bear children, rule the household, and give no occasion to the adversary for insulting. That is how these younger widows are going to get out of this slump that they find themselves in, not through lifelong financial compensation, but actually by finding purpose in life. Marrying, having more children, ruling their households, and not giving an occasion for the adversary for insulting. Purpose is far more important than finances. With the older widows, they've already fulfilled their purpose. Paul talked about how they fulfilled their purpose. They washed the saints' feet. They were hospitable. They brought up children. They relieved the afflicted. They've served their purpose. And now it's time for the church to serve them. But for the younger widows who still have so much life left, they need to find their purpose once again. And that's why Paul encourages them to find that purpose through the family. Verse 15, for some have already turned away after Satan. Some widows, some young widows have turned away from the faith, maybe because they are angry at God. Maybe because now that their husband is gone, they feel like they're free and can do whatever they want to do, now that they don't have their husbands stopping them. Paul says, be wary of those types of widows, the ones that have turned away from God and are following after Satan. So those women would not be included in this list of widows that we are to honor. We are to pray for them, but they aren't to receive the same benefits that Christian widows are actually receiving because they have fallen away from the faith. Yes, they have gone through hard things, and that's very difficult. That is so hard to lose a husband like that. I can't even imagine it. I can't imagine losing my husband. You know, he's like my favorite person on the planet. If I didn't have him, I'd be devastated, you know? But regardless, if these widows have so much bitterness inside their hearts that they choose to turn away from their Christian faith because of their anger, Paul says here in verse 6 that she who gives herself to pleasure is dead while she lives. And so those are the widows that we definitely need to be praying for and encouraging to come back to the church. But until they do, they shouldn't be receiving financial compensation from the church if they are not doing what they should be doing as Christians. That would just be taking advantage of the people who give to the church. You know, don't forget, all of the church finances come from the individual people, and those finances are redistributed. So we need to be very careful with church finances because it's not any one person's individual money. And if the church is not spending that money well, then it actually becomes a burden on the individual members, is what Paul says right here in verse 16 to conclude. If any man or woman who believes has widows, let them relieve them, and don't let the assembly be burdened, that it might relieve those who are widows indeed. So there you go. The church itself is actually the last line of defense. That's why Paul says here, if any man or woman who believes has a widow in their family, in their life, those individuals need to be taking care of those widows so that the church is not burdened. Don't let the church become burdened. Do what you can so that the church doesn't become burdened. You know, I often get a lot of pushback, specifically with giving. I don't know what it is, but people don't like the topic of financial giving. And I kind of understand it. You know, you feel like you earned the money, you feel like it's yours, and you don't want people telling you how you can spend your money. Like, I completely get that. But giving is commanded for Christians in the New Testament. Tithing is not commanded in the New Testament, but giving is, in fact, commanded in the New Testament. So as Christians, we need to be supporting other Christians and also the church, and not expecting the church to financially support everything and everybody for us. Well, faithful listeners, there's a few more things I'd like to say to close out this episode. But before I do, please take a quick listen from one of our sponsors.
Nebraska, get ready to feel the pride. Love Nebraska Volleyball is back January 2026, representing the entire state, featuring some of the best players in the world, including Nebraska's own Jordan Larson, Lexi Rodriguez, and Jay Lee Winters. Massive blocks, long rallies, and a statewide fan base that shows up loud. This is a season you don't want to miss. Tickets available now. Visit lovebnab.com/iHeart.
Imagine this, your house burns down or your partner passes away and you call your insurance company and the claim gets denied. No payout, no safety net, just loss. It sounds extreme, but it happens every day. Insurance policies are full of exclusions that leave people vulnerable. That's why My Policy Advocate exists. They review your coverage, uncover gaps, and explain everything in plain English. They don't sell insurance. They help you understand what you already have. Visit mypolicyadvocate.com and protect what matters most.
I definitely knew this was going to be a more controversial couple episodes, mainly because it is talking about giving. But if you have a hard time with giving, which once again, I do understand that, maybe, pray to God and ask Him to help you with that. And I'm not specifically saying that you have to go and give your church like a ton of money right now. You don't have to do that at all. You should be giving with a cheerful heart and not out of obligation. But if this is something you feel convicted by, maybe pray to God and ask Him to help you see how you're going to be okay, even if you do give some of your income to the church. That's something that I had to do. I am not a natural giver. I don't want to give anything. Usually, my husband has helped me with that because he's much more of a giver than I am. And the one thing that God showed me is that when we give, it always comes back to us. Like, God always ends up supporting us, even when I feel like, oh man, we're giving a lot of money. it always just ends up coming back in some way or another. And that's the one thing God has shown me through giving. But faithful listeners, do not forget, tomorrow will not be a normal scheduled episode. Instead, the episode will be coming out at midnight tomorrow. And I'm very much looking forward to the annual Candlelit Christmas episode that I do every single year, which is what it's going to be. Now, of course, on Thursday, there's not going to be a regular scheduled episode because it is Christmas Day. Well, faithful listeners, have a fantastic and wonderful day. I will see you guys tomorrow, Christmas Eve, for the Christmas Eve special. Happy listening, and God bless. I just want to take a second to thank the team at LifeAudio for their partnership with me on the Bible Explained podcast. In fact, if you go to lifeaudio.com, you will find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.